You're watching Executive Decision, where we talk to top business and economic leaders on the challenges before India's economy. On one hand, the goal of a $5 trillion economy. On the other, the shadow of a slowdown. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me the always outspoken and articulate Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, Chairperson, Biocon Industries, joining us here in a headquarters in Bangalore. Thank you very much indeed, ma'am, for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me start off by asking you a sort of set the ball rolling question about the nature of the supposed crisis or slowdown that we're in. How do you see the problem and the scale of it as we speak? How serious is it?
Well, it is certainly very serious from the kind of data points that we are looking at, from the signals we are getting from various kind of reports. There is a strong economic slowdown. I think, it doesn't take much to understand what the slowdown is all about. Of course, you can talk about a global, recessionary trend, but
Yes.
let's look at India.
Yes.
India is actually facing a very serious economic slowdown.
Right.
If you look at what the reports suggest and which have actually been evidenced by data, that there is a huge, decline in auto sales,
Yes.
two-wheeler sales, FMCG consumption, white good consumption.
Right.
Now, these are all indicators of an economic slowdown.
Right.
You're also, seeing reports of huge job losses.
Yes.
What more do you need to see?
So you're saying the facts, everything point to the fact that there is a deep problem with the economy, but the recent set of steps that the government announced, various measures addressing different aspects of the economy which are under pressure, do you think that they are substantial enough to arrest this or not?
The way I look at our economy is that there are three buckets that you have to look at. One is investor sentiments, investment sentiments, and consumer sentiments or consumption sentiments. So the investor sentiment has been to some extent calmed and comforted by removing these surcharges.
Right.
Okay. But we have not calmed and comforted consumer sentiments or consumption sentiments.
Right.
Neither have we actually made it possible for greater investment comfort, because investments are just not happening in the country.
Why is that though? Why is that? Because one assumption is that because banks are short of cash or they are strained with NPAs. But actually banks are saying we are flush with cash. I met the chairman of State Bank of India recently. He said, I have 1 lakh crore ready to invest. But why is there that hesitation?
Where's the demand, Vasu? There has to be a demand to actually call for expansion. I mean, why would anyone expand either a brownfield or a greenfield expansion if there's no demand? Demand is declining. So with declining demand, you will not see investment. So the only kind of investment that can happen in the country is government investment, mega scale investment in infrastructure.
Right.
That's what China did.
Right.
When it went on to its growth path.
Sure.
Government will need to take at least part of that responsibility or a major part of that responsibility to kickstart the investment and employment cycle.
Okay, so you're saying this requires big government investment into areas like infrastructure and so on, and that is going to break the cycle because, as you said, there's no demand, so there's no investment, so
and there's no consumption.
Because there's no investment, so people
so
are feeling...
there's a vicious cycle which we need to
their pockets
break.
are being pinched.
So the vicious cycle has to be broken and made into a
You're
virtuous
saying that
cycle.
the government should break that, but is that...
Now,
yes.
Let me further add to that.
Yes.
Today there are many aspects of our economy that need correction. Many aspects of the budget that needs rollback. For instance, the FPI surcharge was one such rollback that was done. The other one was about share buyback. There is no clarity on the surcharge being, mandated for a share buyback. India is a dividend economy when it comes to the stock market. These are, middle class people who depend on the stock market and depend on share buyback for their kind of return on investment in the stock market. Now you're basically adding a surcharge to that, which of course the company has to bear. So I think you're making that also now something that the company will think twice about, but because it affects their P&L.
Right.
Earnings are on a decline, quarter on quarter, earnings are on a decline. So you've again created a vicious cycle by introducing this surcharge. The timing is wrong. Why are you doing this at this time? India needs to be on a high growth trajectory.
Right.
You also have a huge obligation in terms of social welfare. You've announced universal healthcare through Ayushman Bharat.
Yes.
You're announcing, Har Ghar Mein Nal.
Yes.
You are talking about Bijli
Yes.
to every household. You're talking about digital connectivity to every household.
So all that needs money, you're saying?
So everything needs money. Now at this point in time, if you are going to start a high tax regime, there's going to be a clam up.
I want to ask you about the high tax regime, and also to understand from you, is that one of the reasons also why there is a reluctance to invest? Because you are amongst the few, I must say, from your tribe who've actually spoken out about it, as has Mohandas Pai, that there is, I don't know if you want to use the word tax terrorism, but there certainly is a perception that there is harassment, the taxman has been unleashed. How real is that a problem?
There are two aspects to this. First and foremost, we are a high tax country, and that's very wrong because we need to be competitive. You see, we are being taxed at between 30 to 35% in terms of corporate tax rates. This is amongst the highest of any country in our region. The ASEAN economies are being taxed at below 25%. The US has brought its tax down to 20%, right? And it was a very high tax regime, which at least a businessman like Trump realized was making them very uncompetitive. You saw a lot of offshoring of profits because of that.
Yes.
In India, it's the same thing. We are making ourselves very uncompetitive. So you've got to bring down the tax rate to 25% to at least make us competitive.
Which was a big demand, by the way.
Which
ahead of the budget.
Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, God bless him, did promise in the first term of the NDA government.
But it's
still not happened. And now the Finance Minister is actually trying to say she is delivering by giving this 25% corporate tax rate to 99.3% of India Inc., which, let me tell you, represents only 7% of India Inc. in turnover terms. 93% of India Inc. in terms of turnover are being denied the 25% tax. How can we revive the economy? What money is there to put back into any expansion or investment? Now, let me just give you another logic.
Yes.
You've seen earnings decline quarter on quarter.
Yes.
The stock markets has crashed substantially. Apart from the surcharge, you've also seen the stock markets decline. The stock market was booming at one time.
Yes.
Today it's declining.
Okay, so you're saying one of the steps when you talk about taxation, one is to cut corporate tax across the board, make it 25%, which has been a long pending demand. But the other question is whether the taxman and his powers or her powers, are they, in your view, out of control?
Absolutely out of control because, Vasu, today, for the first time I'm seeing that this is a government that trusts bureaucracy and the taxman far more than they trust any businessman.
You believe that?
I really believe it because today India Inc. is a pariah. It is alienated. Government, after a long time, I must give credit to the finance minister, at least reached out to India Inc. When she was trying to, find out what this economic slowdown was all about.
Right. But the Prime Minister also, from Independence Day speech, he said that we mustn't victimize or criminalize wealth creators.
Okay, that's very good in terms of making good statements.
Right.
But the real ground reality is that today a business person is not trusted. We are all painted with the same brush saying you are all dishonest, you are all cheats, you all, sort of abused the taxpayers' money, you are denying the poor man his social welfare promises, blah, blah, blah. But
And that has not changed at all, despite all these noises being made at the higher levels.
No,
that we
it has
shouldn't
not changed because
victimize, we shouldn't
well, I hope
persecute.
things improve. I really hope things improve because they must.
Okay.
Because we should be partners in this problem solving. The economic, slowdown, the economic decline is real. You cannot be in denial.
Right.
And the only way forward is for India Inc. and the government to sit together and see how we can come out of this abyss. Okay?
Now, here's the problem though, that when it comes to India Inc. sitting together or conveying this to the government, barring a few of you, nobody speaks up. Why is that?
So let me also be very honest about India Inc. Everyone has not been very honest about their businesses. You look at why is the government so mistrustful about India Inc. Most companies are over leveraged. Most companies are not in a position to pay back. So if you can look at most of these businesses,
Right.
many of them have come to a point of being unviable.
Right.
No entrepreneur wants to file for bankruptcy. So even though we have a great economic reform
Yes.
in the form of a bankruptcy code, very
They
few
hold out
people-
and hold out and hold out
Yes.
as long as possible.
So very few people are willing to file for bankruptcy, which is the norm in a country like the US.
Okay, so that is one part of the story where there's a section of India Inc. that have a certain bad faith associated with how they're running their business, and that is perhaps curbing their ability to speak up because they realize that their own house is not in order. But quite apart from that, isn't there also a sense of a fear factor?
There
where
is,
people
there is, because-
are not willing to speak up?
There is, because there is somewhat a feeling that if you do speak up, there will be some kind of a tax terrorism or something will happen, and that's why people are worried that if they do speak up, will the taxman knock at their door? Will ED knock at their door? What will happen?
You had that whole experience which you spoke about, where you said that you got a call from a government official who said, "Don't speak up or it will not be good." Words to that effect.
That was a friend who's in government, and
Right.
he did tell me, "Why are you making such statements? It's not good." And I just told him, I said, "Listen, I'm saying nothing wrong. I'm just talking about the economy."
Right.
And I think as a citizen, as a concerned citizen, as a proud Indian, I want my economy to fare better. So anyway, that was, I think, blown out of proportion.
Because Mohandas Pai
Yeah,
kind of went public with it and so on.
it didn't matter. But more than that, yes, when I talk to my friends in India Inc., they are all very worried to speak up. They always say, you can speak up, but we will never speak up. I don't know why.
What's giving you the courage though to speak up?
Look, I have created honest wealth. I'm an honest taxpayer. And if I'm concerned about the economy, I've always expressed my views in any government. Even in the last UPA government, I was again I was called the brave voice of corporate India who's speaking up. So I'm always called this voice of corporate India speaking up, irrespective of which government is in power.
So you're saying that because you feel that you really have, in that sense, no reason to be afraid.
Yeah, because
I've
I've been very
your books are
critical.
clean and your record is
Yeah,
clean.
and I've been very critical. If you remember in the UPA time, I was very critical of the UPA government at the end.
Yes.
This time I'm speaking up because I'm seeing the economy declining. I'm worried because you can see the rupee is at an all-time low.
Yes.
For me, it's great because I'm an export-oriented company, but I know
that is not good for the overall economy.
It's not good for the overall economy.
This is the problem with this time, and that we're all facing in a sense that when we were critical of governments in the past, it was seen as doing our job as citizens of this country, whether it was media, whether it was corporate. Now, if you speak up, you're anti-government, you're anti-national. I think this is something new, and I think this is one of the reasons why there's a greater hesitation to speak up.
So I hope that because we are in this troubled times in terms of economic decline, I hope the government realizes that we are all on the same side.
Right.
And I hope the government realizes that we all have to work together to pull ourselves up. That's what I'm hoping for, because we really need to do that. I mean, I've been asking for, when you look at consumer sentiments being improved or boosted, I really think we need to do away with a 28% GST slab altogether.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense to have such a high slab.
But that's one thing, though, that the government doesn't seem to be willing to address, because regardless of which sector it is which is under distress, whether it's auto, whether it's biscuit makers, they're all saying /GST. Government is doing everything around that, but not that.
So they are very dependent on the Babu and the bureaucrat, and the bureaucratic thinking is very, very skewed right now. So I know I was talking to people in the finance ministry who said that yes, actually there was a white paper that actually made the case for a lower GST single rated tax with no exemptions, which could have actually brought in double the GST income.
Sure.
But the government is hell-bent on saying, no, this high GST slab and the mid GST slab and the low GST slab is going to be very good for the country. I don't understand how.
But explain to me something, because when this government came, with the kind of majority it did, and Mr. Modi's track record in Gujarat, many people believed, especially in corporate India, that these things would not be problems. I think you were also one of those who welcomed the change of guard in Delhi. How do you assess then where we are today? What do you think has gone wrong?
So I really think the government came in on this very pro-business agenda. I think the opposition kind of pushed them back by calling them Soot Boot Ki Sarkar, and they realized that their biggest vote bank was going to be the other India. And I think they realized that by constantly supporting business, they were not going to really achieve a great aura about them. And suddenly they took an extreme view, and the pendulum swung from here to there. So suddenly we became marginalized, we didn't count, and everything else was about the poor and about the social agenda and about social welfare.
Which
and
is
it
also
works
important.
very well. It works very well
Yes.
politically because they are the vote bank. They are India.
Right.
Right?
But
And let's not forget that.
Yes.
And it's of course very important.
Yes.
Of course, I don't deny, I myself believe very strongly in the social sector and how as a country we cannot afford to have the kind of poverty levels we have. It's a curse, it's a shame on our country.
Right.
And I for one have always tried to make sure that we must look at how to lift these people out of their very cursed livelihoods and bring them into the mainstream economy. But you don't do one at the expense of the other, because it is very important for us to realize that for the wheels of economy to turn,
Right.
you need wealth creation. Otherwise, where will you have your social welfare funding?
But tell me, don't you have a chance to raise this with the government?
Who listens? I mean, basically, I only can speak to a few people in government, and I don't think it's having much effect.
Okay.
So I just decided, okay, fine, if I'm not going to be listened to, then I might as well shut up.
You're saying that there are not too many sympathetic or responsive
No, I think the government
ears in Delhi?
It's not that. I think the government seems to feel it knows what it's doing. It doesn't need any advice or any viewpoints from outside.
Okay.
I mean, that's really what it's all about today.
Has that changed though? Was there a point where things were different? There was a greater responsiveness?
Yes,
and
there was
less
a
so?
greater responsiveness. We could tell the government.
Towards the beginning of Modi 1.0, is that
Yeah,
that period of time?
I would still say that in all fairness, the only part of government that does sort of consult me and take my advice is the biotech sector.
Right.
So there I must say I work very closely with the government.
You have some audience there. But
Yes, and I do work very closely with the government to see what we can do to boost this sector, and I work very closely with my colleagues.
So but to the point that you made about the fact that there is this kind of overbearing tax and lack of trust between the government and the corporate sector, to the government's point that the government could turn around and say that, look, one of the reasons why we're coming down so hard is we're cleaning up corruption, we're cleaning up black money. Do you buy that?
No, I think it's important, but you don't do it in the way that basically kills the economy, for God's sake. I'm just saying today, okay, demonetization wanted to do that. And then it had a bit of a negative impact on the economy. Not bit, but a big negative impact. Similarly, you're saying, okay, I want to stop corruption, I want to do this, I want to do that. Sure. But you don't do that in one fell swoop.
Right.
When a country has been indulging in all these corrupt practices, when the government official was always being bribed to get things done, speed money was paid and it was an accepted norm. Suddenly one fine day you say, no more speed money, no more corruption, whoever does it will get to jail. That is where I think things are going wrong, because okay, you lock up everybody.
It's too much of a shock to the system.
No, and you lock up everybody, who's going to run the business?
Right.
So that's the problem today.
Did you know Siddhartha at all?
I did. Very well.
And what did you make of that?
He was a very fine person, very gentle person, a person who would, basically he was very proud of what he had built. I think Cafe Coffee Day was a great brand that he had built in India. He had actually taken on the likes of Starbucks and, succeeded.
Yes.
He was the original internet coffee entrepreneur, the pioneer in that segment. So he was very proud of that. He was also someone for whom his reputation mattered a lot.
But
however,
yes,
I think he was also someone who was very concerned with the fact that the markets had not appreciated the value of what he had created.
Right.
He used to often discuss with me saying, Kiran, I have built this great brand, but the markets have not rewarded me because the value of Cafe Coffee Day is below par. It is not what it should be. And he was very worried about that, because he said, that is my currency.
Right.
And if my currency is so undervalued, how can I expand my business? And his business was very capital intensive.
Sure.
So I think he was very concerned about that.
But the triggers, though, which he outlined in that note, saying that there was pressure from a private equity fund, his lenders were after him, and then he also talked about tax harassment. What did you make of that? Because there was also this other side to it where the income tax authorities released these details saying that they found there was exposure to some political money.
Well, I think all that was very unfair, but I think even if there's truth in it, but I think basically what I felt is he was over leveraged, like many businessmen are in this country. And I think he felt he had got into a vicious cycle which he couldn't come out of. He felt that despite having that, they delayed his sale of his shares in Mindtree.
Yes.
I think he had a lot of pressure from the tax authorities and releasing his shares and what have you. I think that all was a very, very difficult time for him. And I think he came to a breaking point where he realized he must have borrowed in the meantime, I feel, when he didn't get all these releases. I think he must have borrowed at a very high interest rate.
And somewhere along the line that may have...
And somewhere along the line, I think he cracked, because he felt he had got into a financial mess which he found it very difficult to get out of. That is my reading.
Right.
I don't know the inner...
In conclusion then, let me ask you, because this is quite a bleak kind of forecast of where we stand. What do you look... Now, when you look into the crystal ball, do you see things turning around immediately, or at the moment there's not much hope?
See, let me be very honest. I am very optimistic about the Indian economy.
Right.
I think the Indian economy can certainly be turned around into this high growth story that we always talk about. Yes, we always talk about the potential of India, but we never seem to realize it.
Yes, we've been talking about it for years now.
For some reason, we, somehow, just mess it up. I mean, that's what it is.
So from this rather bleak
point... So what
point,
I am saying is
from this rather bleak point,
yes,
can things still be turned around?
It can always be turned around with the right policies and the right approach. I mean, if the government of India accepts that we have a very serious economic slowdown, then a number of measures can be worked out. But if you're in denial that there is a slowdown, that there is no economic slowdown,
right,
or it's not that serious and
yes,
it can easily be fixed,
then there's a problem.
It's a problem.
Okay.
And I personally believe it is about the government, the Ministry of Finance, the Commerce Ministry, the Economic Affairs Ministry accepting that there is a serious economic slowdown and we need to get ourselves out of it. And I know we can get ourselves out of it.
Right.
And for that, all stakeholders have to be involved. It cannot be the government figuring out how to do that. For example, angel tax.
Yes.
Okay, let me just opine on that a bit.
Yes, you tweeted about that actually.
I
tweeted an article which is written, I believe, by Mohandas Pai's son.
Yes.
Which says that even though it appears that angel tax has been scrapped,
it's not.
It is not.
because the devil is in the detail. I didn't know this, but obviously the startup entrepreneurs understand what the problem is. From what I understand, from what Siddharth Pai wrote, was that if you are an Indian angel investor, there are a lot of do's and don'ts for the startup, which actually makes it impossible for the startup to compete fairly on a level playing field.
Even now, even after the supposed scrapping.
Because there's ambiguity in the interpretation of certain laws. But if you are a foreign venture fund investing in that startup, there's no problems. So why are you discriminating against the Indian angel investor? Yes, it all started with this suspicion around money laundering.
Right, that these angel investors were actually buying shares at a premium as a way to launder money. That was the initial suspicion.
So you can see that even today, the bureaucracy views the Indian angel investor or the Indian investor with a lot of suspicion, whereas they don't have any suspicion for the foreign investor, and this has to change.
Okay,
if you don't change, then you're discriminating against the Indian investor, the Indian businessman. That's what the problem is.
We're going to look a little closely at this because this is an interesting detail which has come out. But Kiran Shaw, thank you for being as frank as ever.
Thank you.
Thanks.